My name is Nick Polston, and today I'm going to be discussing the films The Other Boleyn Girl and Anne of a Thousand Days. Here is a very short summary of both films' plotlines. In the films, King Henry marries a woman named Catherine. Catherine, however, cannot give birth to a son, who will become the heir to the throne. So King Henry gets a mistress named Mary. The king eventually meets Mary's sister named Anne, and falls in love with Anne, and wants Anne to become one of his mistresses. Anne, however, does not want to be a mistress. So the king decides to separate the church, the Catholic Church, from the country, which would allow him to divorce his wife Catherine and marry Anne. After the king marries Anne, they both have a daughter, after Anne promised to give birth to a son. So shortly after giving birth to her daughter, Anne gets pregnant with a son. After getting pregnant with her son, however, she has a miscarriage. After the miscarriage, Anne fears that she will be prosecuted as a witch. So she asks her brother to help impregnate her so she can give birth to a son. After discussing more about it, Anne and her brother decide that this is not the right path to take. But the damage was already done, and people had already saw them in bed together. After the rumor goes around that they slept together, they were both arrested and executed for incest. Looking at the truth claims of both films, the truth claims in both films were similar in the fact that they were both very implicit. They did not come right out and say that this was based on a true story, based on true events, or things like that we have seen in other films. Instead, they used real places and real characters and real people to set their scene. And I know many people that do know this story, and when they've seen films like these, they know that it's a retelling of an old story. Now let's first look at the visual accuracy of both films. The Other Boleyn Girl, the costumes seem to fit very well. All the people seem to dress very appropriately for their character. For example, the king and queen were dressed very nicely in very fancy clothes that seemed to fit their social status of the time. One problem I did have with the visual accuracy in The Other Boleyn Girl was that the setting seemed a little too modern for the time era. For example, the castle seemed a little too grand and a little too, like I said, modern for the time era that this story actually took place. One positive visual accuracy element in The Other Boleyn Girl was that the accessories that all the characters wore seemed to be very fitting. For example, my partner Colleen had mentioned that the headdresses seemed very appropriate that the women were wearing throughout the film. Now moving on to Anne of a Thousand Days. To me, the clothes seemed a little bit off. As you can see in the corner of the screen, I have two pictures. The one on the left is from The Other Boleyn Girl, and the one on the right is from Anne of a Thousand Days. You can see how the costumes are very different. The Other Boleyn Girl costumes are very nice and fancy, while Anne of a Thousand Days seem more regular and plain. This does not seem to fit what you would expect royalty in this time era to wear. You would expect them to be wearing more fancy attire than something that's more plain. However, in Anne of a Thousand Days, I thought the setting was much better than The Other Boleyn Girl. The setting seemed to match the appropriate location and time of the story. Also, in Anne of a Thousand Days, I thought the accessories that the characters wore were very fitting for their social status and the time that the film took place. Moving on to oral accuracy. The Other Boleyn Girl, the characters had some form of an accent, but it wasn't very strong. I would normally expect the accents to be a little bit stronger, coming from this location and time era. The background music in both films were very fitting. They fit the mood, the tempo, and the time that the story took place. One thing that my partner and I both noticed is that in The Other Boleyn Girl, the dialogue was not as proper as what you would expect it to be. With the dialogue not being as proper, It was easier to understand, but it took away from the oral accuracy. In this era, you would expect that people from this social status would speak in that more proper English than more modern English like we speak. So I believe that is of inaccuracy in the other Boleyn Girl. Now moving on to Anne of a Thousand Days. Anne of a Thousand Days also had accents, but once again were not very strong, and not as strong as what I would expect them to be coming from this time era and location. Once again, the background music was very fitting for all the scenes that music was played. And as I mentioned before, Anne of a Thousand Days used more proper English, which I feel like makes the movie more accurate. However, by using more proper English, it was hard to understand, and as my partner Colleen had mentioned, it makes you really listen to the story a lot more closely because it's harder to understand and it's easier to miss something. Now moving on to chronological accuracy, starting with the other Boleyn Girl. Some moments that you would expect to be very long seemed very short in this film, and vice versa. Some moments that you would think that would be very short seemed very long in this film, which seemed a little backwards to me. And when compared to Anne of a Thousand Days, there was not as much detail in the film, which made the film shorter, but I believe easier to watch. Now, one thing that my partner and I noticed in both films is that the pregnancies were very fast. In both films, when Anne was pregnant, those 9 months seemed to go by much faster than what it really takes to be pregnant. Now looking at just Anne of a Thousand Days. Anne of a Thousand Days went into much more detail when compared to the other Boleyn Girl. However, this made the film much longer, and in my opinion, it slowed the film down and made it harder to watch. When a film gets slowed down, to me, it makes the film seem more choppy and harder to follow and harder to watch. So I feel like that throws off the chronological accuracy of Anne of a Thousand Days. Lastly, we're going to look at thematic accuracy. The thematic accuracy, I believe, in both films fit each other very well, especially when you look at the family dynamics of both films. Because both films are based off the same true story, the family dynamics are a lot of the same in both films, so we're going to take a look at them together. One thing that I noticed that I thought was very fitting was the reaction to the incest. In this time period, incest had a very big taboo on it, and so that just a rumor, it was able to cause the execution of two people that didn't necessarily do anything, but was just a rumor that was being created. And also, one thing that I noticed was the arranged marriages. In this time era, arranged marriages was a very common thing. So I would expect to see that in a film that is supposed to be representing that time era. So I thought that was very accurate. And two things I believe that go along with the arranged marriage is love and power. A lot of times in arranged marriages in this time era, there wasn't necessarily love involved. An arranged marriage was more of a business transaction. And that is seen in these films. And a lot of times that the business transaction that goes on is for the balance of power. And that power was what was really being supported there and not love. In conclusion, my partner and I believe that the other Boleyn Girls told the story better. Yes, we both agree that Anne of a Thousand Days had much more detail, but that made the film much longer and harder to follow. The other Boleyn Girl kept the film short, took out a little bit of the detail, but still told the same story, and still told the story well, while remaining accurate for most of the film. Because the film was shorter, I believe that the film was much easier to understand for your average film watcher, and easier for the person to understand the story that the film is trying to set.